Hi, Harry Dent, just back from Australia. I've never been more jet lagged in my life, but it was a great trip. This time I'd been there in late 2011 doing public seminars for Secure the Future and a big media tour around the last book, The Great Crash Ahead. And this time I did it a little smarter. I came over early, brought my wife. We went up to the Great Barrier Reef to Hamilton Island, one of the greatest and prettiest islands up there. I learned a great story there, that Robert Oatley, who put Australia on the map with Rosemount Winery, plus he has a lot of other ventures. He's kind of like the Richard Branson of Australia. He bought this island in the previous downturn, 2000 to 2002. Just after that, when it got in trouble, he bought it for $150 million. And I'm telling you, I'm sitting on this island. It's got major resorts. It's got Qualia, where I stayed, is one of the greatest resorts in the world, voted by Travel and Leisure magazine. It's got hotels. It's got stores. It's got a marina and harbor. It's got residential developments, and it's all first class. He bought this island, which I would say was worth $2.5 to $3 billion today, back in 2003 for $150 million. It had been started by an entrepreneur in the early 80s as a resort island. He built the harbor, did all this stuff, the initial hotels. This guy, Robert Oatley, is a yachter, and he went by this island and said, oh man, I wish I had bought this island and done this development. He fell in love with the island. And then he finds it later, when we have a worldwide downturn in the early 2000s, what does he do? He had sold Rosemount Winery for something like $1 billion. He had cash. He walked in and bought this thing, I'd say back then, for 10 cents on the dollar. $150 million. The airport. He has a full commercial airport. Very few islands have that. Not a little landing strip for little biplanes and stuff. A full commercial airport and a full harbor and marina, which he all improved. So that's how you make money in a downturn. That was one of the greatest stories while I was there, and I learned it while I was on vacation. Well, next I go and do media in Brisbane, in Sydney, to promote the event and promote my new book, The Demographic Cliff, which had just come out there. And guess what? I mean, I only got one question there. Newspaper, radio, TV, doesn't matter. Property prices, are they in bubble? Is it going to burst or not? And if it does, how far to go? And of course, all the experts over there are saying it's not a bubble because of this, that, and that. You know what my statement was to everybody? It doesn't matter what causes a bubble. The very things all these experts are arguing, foreign buying from Chinese and stuff, limited supply, rising demand from baby boomers, all this sort of stuff. That's how you get a bubble. But they would say, the experts would say, well, Harry just doesn't understand the uniqueness of Australian real estate. I'm like, oh, really? I spent 22 years in California. California and Australia are two of the most similar regions I've ever seen. Coast, mountains, desert, limited land for development, attractive places, great weather. Everybody wants to move there. Exact same thing. My message over there is California real estate and our U.S. bubble peaked exactly when valuations were where Sydney and Melbourne are, 10 times income in California, L.A., San Diego, San Francisco. They're right there. And I said, it didn't even take a trigger. Our economy wasn't going down in 2006 when real estate had started to fall. And we didn't have some big interest rate spike. There wasn't, some open up and new supply. It just happened because demographics started to shift, and mostly because of overvaluations. So the message I gave in Australia, they don't have a demographic problem. They're one of the fabulous six, I call, countries that actually have a larger echo boom than a baby boom after a small dip. In fact, Australia only goes sideways. They have the best demographics in the world. That's not going to be their problem. High real estate prices, falling resource prices. They're a big commodity exporter. And that's going to continue by our cycles, and the China bubble bursting. And the one thing people did agree with me on, they didn't necessarily agree that China was going to burst, but they said, oh, if China's bubble bursts, we are in trouble because Chinese buyers, rich Chinese, are fleeing China, which is not a good sign for China's bubble bursting. And they're buying in English-speaking countries where they can get education for their kids. They're buying in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. They're buying in Vancouver, San Francisco, LA, Southern California, London. That's where, in New York. So they're still bidding up prices and has a much bigger impact in Australia. So Australia does have a bubble. That's my message. I will stand by that. I know the experts are always going to say not, but bubbles always burst. bubbles go back to where they started, and the greater the bubble, the greater the burst. I spent more time on bubbles than anything else here, and I spent 6 to 7 hours over 3 to 4 days with 2 audiences of about 700 each in Sydney and Brisbane at Secure the Future. And we covered everything, but my main emphasis, people got to start seeing bubbles. If you don't understand bubbles, you're not going to understand what's going to happen when this bursts. And when bubbles burst, they don't correct, they crash. So that was my message to Australia. Demographics is not your problem, unlike most countries. That's not going to be the trigger for your real estate downturn. It's going to be external factors, and just the fact that your real estate is so expensive now that nobody can afford it except very affluent people and foreign buyers. That's a sign of a bubble bursting.